Hi, Eric.
Hey, Aaron.
How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, but your expression on your face is making me nervous.
I just want to start with baseball.
Oh, okay. All right.
I
haven't been following baseball recently,
I
but...
thought I'd throw you a curveball.
Okay.
As it were. Sorry for that. I apologize. I've just been watching Moneyball over the last day or two.
It's a good movie.
And I just really forgot how much I really enjoyed it. I thought I'd bring it up as a completely unrelevant part of our show today, just right at the top, because I thought it was fun.
I feel challenged to tie it in at some point now.
Yeah, I know. That's kind of what I'm going for. But, I just had a couple questions for you. These are the kind of things that get you riled up on Twitter.
Okay.
Is stuff about the church and stuff about the Oakland A's. Yeah. That's what I've noticed, is that when you tweet...
Terrible A's ownership.
These are the things. That's what I wanted to ask you about, because I'm not following it at all.
Yeah.
Like, are they getting transferred somewhere?
They're going to Sacramento.
To Sacramento, that's right.
Which... There isn't a major league stadium there. I'm surprised the owner... the thing I don't get is why the other owners allow the Oakland A's owners to behave so badly, because it hurts all of their bottom lines.
Yeah.
That's mysterious.
Have you been this year?
No, I haven't.
Okay, we're just at the start of the season, right?
We're more than 20 games in.
We're more than 20 games in. Are you going to go this year?
Probably, because last time, and I heard they're bringing back $2 Wednesdays.
Oh, so, that sounds fun.
In the last few years, as they've been lowering the quality of the product, they've been charging more. So they've finally decided, I guess, to let people pay what it's worth.
And Moneyball is about the A's.
It is about the A's.
Yeah. How much of it is true?
It's pretty true. So it's based on the book Moneyball by Michael Lewis, who lives in Berkeley.
Yeah.
And he was my son's Little League coach.
Oh, is that a fact?
So I was an assistant coach with him, so I got to hang out with him. I like that guy a lot.
Wow, I didn't know I was this close to celebrity.
Yeah, so close.
Other than yourself, of course.
Sure. But yeah, so it was, I didn't talk to him about writing really, although he would mention a couple times when he was on like a trip for journalism or whatever. But yeah, if you haven't read the book, I think you would like it also.
Really?
It is a really... fun read.
What I like about it is how it just starts with stats. Just from
there's a lot of numbers.
Like minute one of the movie, it shows like dollars on the screen.
Yeah.
And they're immediately talking about it. I just like how there's not, this is baseball. Isn't it great?
Yeah.
I mean, they do that later, but they start the show with like assuming that you're on board.
Yeah, I think it's a great movie.
So let's start this show assuming that people are on board.
Let's start with, so would you like to start by talking about... the end of the world?
Oh.
Do you want to start there?
Sure.
Okay. Aaron, you're probably aware of this, but there are people in our country, meaning the United States of America, no disrespect to people outside of our country, but in our country, there are a significant number of people who are pro-Israel, not because they agree with their policies or because they feel bad about the Holocaust or because, not for any of those kind of reasons, but there are people who are pro-Israel simply because, as they read the Bible, there needs to be an established nation of Israel in order for the world to end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am aware of this.
How do you feel about that?
I hate it.
Go on.
Well, okay, so this has been a topic that's come up on our show in the past.
I think we did a whole episode on Mormons and Jews, and we've done a whole episode on millennialism.
Millennialism, right?
Yeah.
And this topic the more we talk about it, the more I have a kind of, what's the right word? Patter isn't the right word, but more of a set of logical conclusions that just make sense to me.
Sure.
Right? Which is that if you believe that the world must get worse before it gets better, then it turns your religion inward instead of outward. Right? You focus on preparation instead of cooperation.
It also makes you in favor of bad things.
Right. It makes you excited when...
Sorry, I don't mean to imply that Israel's bad. I don't want to get into that. But it probably makes you happy when Israel goes to war. Yeah. And like they're bombing people or they're being bombed.
Yeah.
Because that's the world getting worse and that's how Jesus comes.
Yeah.
Because that's definitely Jesus' personality.
That's the trigger of the second coming.
Right.
Right? And you still hear about the second coming a lot in general conference talks. People talk about preparing for the second coming of the Lord. Mm-hmm. And what's really hard about this, I didn't know that this is where we were going to go.
It's not where we're going. It's just where we're starting.
What's hard about this is that it's frustrating because the second coming is such an interesting and joyous topic that comes baked with it, this prophecy of doom and gloom, right? Mm-hmm. And it's hard to separate those two things. It's hard to know how to approach the conversation, right? But, yeah.
Well, we've talked about that before, as you mentioned. And I don't want to talk about that because you know my opinion that it's probably not in the next few weeks, the second coming. I want to start by talking about Jarom.
The Book of Jarom. Or the person of Jarom.
Both.
Okay.
Both. Did you teach this in seminary?
Just
Jarom?
recently, yeah.
Yeah. What was your take?
Well, we didn't spend a ton of time in Jarom, as you can imagine.
I always thought he was the most boring of the books.
Yeah. So this is a book in the Book of Mormon.
Yes.
All right. The Book of Mormon has a interstitial period, right? And it's directly relevant to the last 116 pages.
Yeah.
Which is probably a longer conversation that you want to do right here.
No, I'm not planning on going into that at all. Yeah,
okay.
just like who is he? What lessons did you feel could be taught from Jarom?
Well, the history that I was going to say up front was that this was the part of the Book of Mormon where the timeline accelerates for a brief period.
It does. We go through a few hundred years in just a few pages.
Yeah, so we start at 600 BC, right? We flee Jerusalem. Lehi and Nephi are on the boat.
Yeah.
They arrive. They separate from each other, right? And then they separate again, right? And it's after, is Jarom before or after that? It's before the
It goes Jacob, Enos, Jarom, Omni.
Yeah, so Jacob, Enos, Jarom. So this is after, there's like several different separations of Lehites from the from the Nephites from the Lamanites. And this is part of one of those periods.
And certain political things seem to get calcified
And the small plates of Nephi are getting shorter and shorter. There's just less space to put things on.
Yeah.
And so I think that the histories just start becoming more and more compressed because they're being put on the other plates of Nephi.
Which are run by different people. So this has largely been my attitude towards Jarom also, is that they're running out of room on the plates, not that much to say, maybe the people are writing them are less interesting, and so they just don't talk as much, and then before you know it, they're all out of space, and they give the place to Benjamin.
Less interesting or less interested? Because there's a couple people like Amaleki, who is really funny when you read his like 3 verses.
Yeah, the guy who that wasn't Malachi, but it was one of them anyway.
Well, there's Amaleki, and then there's Amaleki or something like that.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You know what? Let's get my reference straight. What's funny about him is that he's the guy that says, "I was a wicked man," right? And I didn't keep the commandments. This is an.
I think that was Omni.
That is Omni. Yeah. But
he's the one who starts off the Book of Omni.
Yeah, but it's funny to me because he says the following, right? We had many seasons of peace, right? So came to pass 276 years had passed away, and we had many seasons of peace, and we had many seasons of serious war and bloodshed. Period. Yea, and in fine, 282 years had passed away. And if you read into that period, to me, it's very obvious that the dude was like, I guess I got to keep working on this history because my dad wanted me to. All right. It's been 276 years. Like, there was some peace. There was some war. I'm going to tap this out onto the plate. This is boring. And then he came back like 14 years later and said, all right, it's been 282 years now. Anyway, I just thought that was funny. All right, but this is Jarom.
We're going to talk about Jarom, which is the book before. Omni has a bunch of writers all crammed in at the end. We're going to be talking off and on. I'm going to be taking stuff from Sharon J. Harris's brief theological introduction book.
Sharon
J. Harris is her name.
Sharon J. Harris.
And she wrote about Enos, Jarom, Omni.
This is the same series that we quoted recently.
Yeah, we've quoted 2 volumes of it so far. Well, maybe 3.
We quoted one we never got to.
One got cut out and one got. So anyway, they're great books. I just started Mosiah. I highly recommend the series. But I'm going to talk about Jarom. She does, in her Omni section, she tries to argue that these guys are a lot more intentional than you describe them. I'm not quite sure I buy that. Mm-hmm. I do buy where she ends her conversation on Omni. I think that was very insightful. But we're going to talk about what she has to say about Jarom, who, in my mind, is the easiest book to ignore in the Book of Mormon. Because it's short. It doesn't really say anything that wasn't said by someone on either side of him. And
in verse 2, the first sentence is, and as these plates are small.
Yes. And he says, like, hey, there's been enough prophesying, it's sufficient, I don't need to write anything new. Mm-hmm. And so why should we read him if he's not saying anything new? That's kind of always been my attitude. But to start it off, I'm going to read rather a long quotation from the book. Mm-hmm. And then we'll jump around and hit some other stuff later. But here she goes. It is important to consider the Nephite perspective on Lamanites and prophecies, because as church members, we so often automatically relate to or identify with the Nephites. Does that sound accurate to you?
Yeah. What an interesting way to phrase it. We identify with the Nephites.
Yeah.
While they're in their righteous periods, I should say. But even when they're in their prideful periods,
it's easy because all the narrators are Nephites.
Yeah.
And we spend our time in Nephite culture. We barely visit the Lamanites. When we do, it's through an outsider's perspective.
And they are not complimentary.
Not very often. Mm-mm. Yeah. When they are, it's easy to forget those parts because they get...
I think we might have just used two different words of complimentary. The Nephites are not very flattering when they describe the Nephites.
And so do we want them to compliment our view of ourselves?
Exactly.
All right, so Sharon says, my general experience being raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has been, at least in North America, that we champion the Book of Mormon as specifically American scripture written for our day. In our enthusiasm for what it offers, we take lessons from its pages and apply them to our ideas about the European settlement of the Americas and the founding of the United States, et cetera, et cetera. I think we're doing better at that, but of not treating that quite so literally, but I would agree with that. In all this application, we typically draw parallels between ourselves as members of the church and the members of the church who are the most visible in the Book of Mormon. That is, we liken ourselves to the Nephites. Serious students of the Book of Mormon have benefited in countless ways from such comparison. We seek to emulate Nephi's obedience or Captain Moroni's steadfastness. We recognize how spreading power among a democratic system of judges avoids certain political risks posed by a monarchy. We aspire faith unto deliverance like the peoples of Limhi or Alma. If, however, Aaron, we follow the comparison between modern members of the church and Nephites to its end, its picture is sobering. What does it mean if we identify with the Nephites and the Nephites are destroyed?
Ooh. Hot take.
Hot take. It means, she goes on, that we, like the Nephites, are susceptible and even inclined to sin, violence, and war.
Stop.
Okay.
There's not enough context here for our non-LDS members.
Oh, okay. You want to tell us what Nephites and Lamanites are?
Listeners, yeah.
Give me the 300-second version.
Okay, and that they were destroyed, right? All right. So you've got Nephi crossed the ocean, right, with his dad and brothers.
Yes.
They split into two nations, the Nephites and the Lamanites.
Right.
And over the course of about 1,000 years of history, they had wars and friendliness and wars, and they ignored each other, and then more wars. And then Christ came.
Comes.
Everybody became a Nephite.
For 100 years all as well.
Yeah, and then everything kind of goes bad. They split back up into Nephites and Lamanites, and eventually they all forsake the gospel, and the Lamanites destroy the Nephites.
Yes, so this group of people who all our narrators have come from, that we've been following for 1,000 years, at the end, they're all dead.
Yeah, but they're also all blended.
Right. It's weird how... yes. I think... we've spoken about this too before, but the idea that any racial group is pure is
nonsense.
Is nonsense. Yeah.
Okay, so I interrupted you. Go back a few sentences and start your...
Okay. So what does it mean if we identify with the Nephites and they are destroyed? It means that we, like the Nephites, are susceptible and even inclined to sin, violence, and war. It means that we, like the Nephites, are almost guaranteed to be too comfortable with subtle forms of racism, sexism, and corruption. Seeing ourselves as like the Nephites should destroy our self-satisfaction with our own faithfulness. It should alert us that as a people, we probably don't notice when we are falling into pride. It should nudge us to recognize that others, even those we may regard as enemies, may in the end be more righteous and more qualified to occupy the land than we are. She goes on, but I kind of want to stop there. All right, I want to skip to the very end of a couple paragraphs. Like the Nephites, all too often we judge others and look forward more to the prophesied apocalypse than to helping. It is so easy to respond this way while feeling confident in our status as chosen.
Yeah.
So the Nephites knew they were going to get destroyed. The Nephites also knew bad things would happen before Jesus came. But I think you and I, Aaron, don't think that looking forward to apocalypse is the best way to live a life in the modern moment.
Yeah.
So Jarom, to come back to Jarom, he lives hundreds of years after the arrival from Jerusalem. He lives hundreds of years before the coming of Christ, and even more hundreds of years before the final apocalypse where the Nephites are destroyed. Jarom...
And he's in that interesting time in the Book of Mormon where I think that the details of Christ were not as well known yet. Like
yeah,
Nephi
like a lot more is going to come through Alma, which hasn't happened yet.
A lot more.
Yeah.
And Abinadi.
Mm-hmm.
So those folks are going to give more details about Christ and his atonement and his resurrection. They had the prophecies of Nephi, right? But they hadn't been organized into quote unquote churches yet.
Yeah, there's a lot yet to happen. And later, Sharon Harris asks a question I want to come back to later, and I want to come back to multiple times probably. Quote, what does it look like to live and keep faith in the middle of a dispensation? Unquote. Because like Jarom, we're a couple hundred years from the beginning, and who knows how long from the end. We live in the middle.
And it came to pass that the prophets of the Lord did threaten the people of Nephi. This is from Jarom 10. According to the word of the Lord, that if they did not keep the commandments but should fall into transgression, that they should be destroyed off the face of the land.
But the details aren't necessary because they're sufficient, right? When was the last time a significant piece of doctrine was added to modern scripture?
Do you mean like when did the last time we get some canonization?
We could think about it that way. That's a nice measurable way.
Yeah, it's been 1978.
Yeah. And before that?
When was Declaration 1?
Late 1800s.
Yeah. So...
Yeah. I mean, Joseph F. Smith's Vision of the Redemption of the Dead comes in like 1918 or 19.
Okay.
That's canonized, I think, also in the 70s. Mm-hmm. But the beginning is kind of over, right? Like the big outpouring of the Restoration, and then presumably someday Jesus comes. But right now we're kind of in between those extremes. Perhaps, the Jarom of our day, if we had to keep it onto this small book, onto the small plates,
yeah,
maybe the stuff that is coming out today isn't necessarily what makes the small plates. What's been said is sufficient.
They are not threatening our current leaders. Have you noticed that?
I would say threatening is way too strong a word for what they're doing.
What they're doing is I think that the tone of our talks does not match the tone of what is being described here in this chapter.
I would agree. Yeah. But the thing about the middle is it's long. And there are high points and there are low points, but it keeps going.
Yeah.
Keeps going. So how do we... But the middle's boring, right?
But also, what you're describing, living in the middle, also goes against a lot of the millennialism talk.
Yeah.
That I certainly heard a lot about when I was a kid.
What percentage of our peers would you say have something in their patriarchal blessings? Cut for a moment to those who don't know what a patriarchal blessing is. Mm-hmm. Patriarchal blessing is something every member of the church receives generally once in their life, which is personalized prophecy for their, usually for life, but it's not contained to the future mortality. It's
very rare to get a second one.
Yeah, one of my grandparents did because their tribe was not declared. Mm-hmm. In the 1800s, it was more common. We talked last episode about how Patty Sessions got 3, but that's unusual. Doesn't happen anymore. Mm-hmm. Anyway, how many of our peers would you say have something in their patriarchal blessing referencing the second coming or the millennium or... Well, I don't have numbers for this, but do you have a...
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know. Not 0 for sure.
Oh, it's certainly greater than 0.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just based on... we generally don't share our patriarchal blessings willy-nilly, but just based on conversations I've had with people, I would say 50% is my over-under.
You see, I don't think we need to even go to the patriarchal blessings to talk about this. I think that if you look for the language, you have been saved for these latter days, right?
Yeah.
And you are the strong and valiant spirits that the Lord has set aside for the last days to fight against the world, right? That was the language when I was in high school, middle school.
And it was for probably maybe 20 years before we were that age too. I'm not sure how far back it goes.
It was written into our musicals,
like
Saturday's Warrior. It was written into the talks, the conversation.
It was common rhetoric.
I don't think that's the case anymore.
I hear it every once in a while, but I don't think it's as saturated as it used to be.
Yeah. If you go back and I really feel a difference in today's general conferences compared to those 10, 15 years ago.
Do you think we've accepted that we're in the middle?
This is what I'm kind of driving at based on what you're saying, is that yes.
So part of the argument I want to make today is that being comfortable in the middle is something we are called to do. It's an important part of discipleship today. So the question is, how do we do it? And that's why I'm really intrigued by Sharon Harris's explanation of Jarom, because Jarom becomes a really good example of how we live in the middle. So until the end of the world comes, the Nephites were fine, right? They didn't have to worry about the future because it wasn't now. So that's one way to live it being in the middle. It's like, it's not a problem because bad stuff, good stuff, it's all far away. We don't have to worry about it. Today's fine, right? It's an eat, drink, and be merry kind of attitude. But Jarom tells us that the prophets, priests, and teachers of his generation didn't see it that way. Instead, they taught the people, this is verse 11, to look forward unto the Messiah and believe in him to come as though he already was. She says, this changes everything. So what does it mean to look forward and believe in something to come as if it already had come? How does that change the way you engage?
Can you imagine what it would have been like to be taught the gospel of Jesus Christ as someone who only saw it as something to come as opposed to something that's happened?
It feels like it'd be different, right?
We know about a Lord who dressed in robes and sandals and walked around on dusty roads.
Yeah.
In and around Jerusalem, right? Mm-hmm. We know about the donkeys. We know about the stables.
Yeah.
We know about the fishermen. We know about the tax collectors. We know about the Pharisees. We know about the palm leaves.
Yeah.
Right? We have culture. Roman coins, right? Give unto Caesar, right? Yeah. We have all of this history. But to Jarom, right?
Yes.
It was the Messiah.
Still to come.
Still to come. And, will save us from our sins, right?
Yeah.
But it's an abstract concept, and you still need to apply it to when you go to repent, right?
Yeah.
So all the same principles and ordinances of the gospel.
Yes.
Right? But without any of the lore.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to phrase it. It's a common theme in deeply Mormon science fiction, the idea of aliens coming to Earth and either discovering that this is the planet the Messiah came to, or hoping it is, or being surprised to discover it is. In fact, as we record this, we're recording this on May Day. Just today, Irreantum published a folklore themed issue, and there's a story about this very thing. This is a recurring theme. Like, what would it be like to be on a planet where Jesus didn't even come? Mm-hmm. I'd like to be clear to anybody listening. We don't know that's how Jesus works. Like, it is not clear how universal salvation works. But it's it's a hard question, right? Like, what if Jesus wasn't even on this planet, Aaron?
Yeah.
Or if we believe that somewhere in the universe at some time there will be a Messiah or was a Messiah. We're not even sure.
This is such a rabbit hole, and we're teetering right on the edge of it. We're just looking down.
So let me come back to the book. So remember, the preachers in Jarom's time told the people to look forward unto the Messiah and believe him to come as though he already was.
As though he already was. I love that particular phrase.
Yeah, which she suggests, we therefore can have Christ in our lives now, even though on a calendar we are between his comings to earth. So we are also in between. I mean, I kind of like you said, it's nice to have the lore, but we're still in between. That was 2,000 years ago. And we have no idea how long it is till Jesus comes again. And so the point is, Jarom teaches us we can find Christ not just at the beginning and the end, which are the fun parts, but also in the middle. Nobody says Two Towers is their favorite Lord of the Rings movie. Not because it isn't great, but, people love the beginning and they love the end. The middle is generally not the highlight. Oh, you Two Towers is your favorite, I can tell.
No, it's definitely Fellowship.
Oh, okay.
And parts of Return of the King.
Yeah. I think my favorite moment in all three movies is, and this is why I think Ian McKellen not only deserved the nomination but should have won the Oscar, is when he says, is it secret, is it safe? One of the most intense moments in film history. He does it, he's so good in that scene. So it's amazing.
It's so great.
Yeah. So one of the questions I want to sort of leave with us is, how do we look forward unto the Messiah and believe into him as if he's already come without thinking that it has to be in our lifetimes for it to count? How does this shift our attention to our responsibilities with our relationship to the Messiah? Relationship we've talked about before in covenant, or should maybe be thought of as closer to synonymous. What is it? How do we live out the covenant when we're in between, when we're not at the exciting moments?
Wait a minute. What did you say? Relationship and covenant are close to synonymous?
Yes, we've talked about that, haven't we?
That does not ring a bell.
Oh well, I would say let's save that for another episode because I have more to say about that, but it's not where we're going today. But this also gets to the question of... So here's the other thing I want to talk about today. So there's two things I want to talk about. One is about being in the middle.
Wait, I'm not totally done chewing on that.
Okay, let's keep chewing on it then.
Believe in him as though he already was, right?
Yes.
Being in the middle. I just want to dig a little bit deeper into how different that feels from a lot of our church history, which is all about the end.
Well, Jesus' disciples thought so too.
What do you mean?
Well, they all thought that second coming would be any day. They were prepping for it. They thought it'd be right around the corner. Christians have always felt that way.
Is there a Bible verse that is like what you just said?
I don't have a Bible in front of me, but I mean, you read any history of Christianity, it seems pretty clear the people...
Of Christianity, sure.
Yes, that's what I mean.
I thought you meant like the 12 apostles. Like there isn't...
I don't know about any of them saying it was right around the corner.
Okay.
Off the top of my head.
There's this one phrase that stuck in my head very strongly about Brigham Young's time when they came to Utah, and there was this blood red sunset over a desert. Yeah. Right? And how the idea... This was, some... nasty stuff happened early in Utah, right? Yeah. And this documentary was about what could have contributed to some of those things. And one of the things that it talked about how was that everybody was looking forward to the second coming, right? And this
it changes your attitude about now.
Yeah, this atmosphere would have contributed to this upcoming doom, right?
Sure.
And there's that famous quote, maybe you can tell me if it's true or not, about, Brigham Young, should we even build houses?
Oh.
And the answer was, prepare to live here? Is that a real thing?
So I've heard that about Utah. I can't source it, but in the Doctrine and Covenants, it happens when the people, early Mormons got kicked out of place, And I don't have the scripture available at my fingertips. We can look it up and add it to the show notes. But there is a time where they ask the Lord, is there a point in building houses? And the Lord tells them to live on the land as if for years. Yeah. So live here like it's you're going to be here.
Like it's your home.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that you will be, but prepare for that.
That's definitely a put you in the middle sense. Yeah. Right? But I'm telling you, for a long part of my early childhood and later, even past my mission, I always kept in the back of my head that, maybe I don't need to worry about turning 50.
Well, how many...
The Lord will be here by then, for sure.
It's a common attitude, we don't need to worry about fossil fuels, right?
Yeah.
As if when Jesus comes back, he's going to clean up our mess for us. Yeah. No, we're going to have to do it ourselves.
But this is what I was trying to say about the inwardism of thinking the end is coming soon, right? Because if you think the end is coming soon, then you don't care about community.
What's the point?
There's no real...
What's the point of building something if it's just going to get knocked down?
Yeah. So... Okay, so yeah, that's what I wanted to just touch on, is that they really had but at the same time, I definitely had Sunday school teachers that talked about how this is the wrong way to look at it, right? That we don't know the time and season of his coming, and that we need to prepare and live our lives and build Zion where you are. Right. Right? I mean, the seeds of the kind of change in the attitude were definitely there, but you are the superstar spirit reserved for the end of the day. I mean, that's quite a statement. Yeah. And in reality, I'm 46 years old, and I feel like one of my biggest contributions is just, good kids.
Yeah, I do think it's really healthy to be thinking about future generations. I was just reading... Oh, give me a second. I'll have to remember what it was. I will figure out what it was, and we can throw it in the show notes later.
Just, dear reader, we often will fix things in post, where we will cite the things that we say in the show notes, like if in situations like this one, if Eric later can find the reference, I'll put it in the show notes, and if I can't, then I'll write a little story for you, and I will say, we couldn't find it, but this and this and this is relevant.
I just read it a few days ago, and anyway, the character was lambasting humans. Oh, I remember what it was. Yay! I remember. Okay, so I was just reading Stephen Peck's collection of short stories, which I believe is called Tales of Pleasant Grove. Anyway, in the short story, this girl finds a Japanese river dragon that was transplanted into Utah, and it's been living in this creek for a long time. And anyway, one of the things that frustrates the dragon is that people... Americans specifically, like the dragon is not real keen on Americans, but he says Americans are not good at family. She's like, what are you talking about? Like, because she grew up in a Mormon household in Utah, and like family's all we talk about. Like, we care about family. That's what we care about. He's like, no, you don't. Like, you think family is like your parents and your kids, but you're using up everything. You're destroying your children's world to take care of your children. Like, it's nonsense. It's terrible. It's bad thinking. And this is one of the failures of really choosing to accept being in the middle. Is that how much responsibility do you have for the future? If the future isn't deep, then how much responsibility do you have for it? Maybe not much. And that will affect the way we use our resources or treat other people or build community.
But I genuinely think that this has gotten better.
I think so too.
I think that the rhetoric has changed. I don't hear shining stars of glory, in talks to kids.
Well, it's because kids these days aren't as good as we were, Aaron.
Of course.
That's the reason.
But I also maybe it's a Berkeley Ward thing, right?
That could be. I've been in this ward a long time.
We've been in this ward a long time. I mean, we had 2 Sundays recently talking about women in the priesthood.
That's true.
What a joy.
For Elders Quorum. Yeah, Elders Quorum, not the most recent Elders Quorum, but the 2 before it were both focused on women in the priesthood. Which was a nice coincidence for us recording those episodes simultaneously.
It was so much fun.
All right, so going back to people who are pro-Israel in order to help the world end, they, I think, perhaps legitimately, feel a responsibility to help God accomplish his great work.
I do think that I can question this statement.
Feel free.
That of this categorization
of
pro-Israel to help the world end.
Oh, I don't want to suggest everybody feels this way. Like, please, I hope I haven't come off that way.
I don't. Well, I'm just.
There are just some people who feel that way.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking specifically of those people that they probably feel that this attitude is good because they're helping God accomplish his great purposes of destroying the world so Jesus can come again. And so that raises an interesting question, like what responsibility...
Again, I just want to put more context in here. Destroy the world, right? The prophecies about the second coming, right?
Gog and Magog.
Gog and Magog and stuff like that. It is really easy to say, that they're 100% like literal. Like this is exact. Like there's going to be a big war and it's going to be real bad. It's going to involve everybody. It's also possible to say that none of this is ever going to happen. This is all figurative, and we should just be learning from it. And then it's also possible to read the Doctrine and Covenants, which we did a couple episodes ago, and look and say, well, okay, this seal means this and this seal means this in the Book of Revelation, and realize that there's some doctrinal stuff that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints we have in our main volume of Scripture that confirms some of these prophecies, right? Or at least talks about them, right?
I really don't want to get hung up on the end of the world. It's just an example. Maybe it's too big to be an example. But the question I want to ask
I'll stop.
What responsibility do we, you, I, others have to promote the fulfilling of prophecy that we believe to be inspired?
Well, I think to be able to answer that question, I would need better prophecy.
What do you mean by better?
I think I'm being provocative.
You're not sure though.
No, but I'm not sure. I think I'm being deliberately annoying. I think that the prophecy that we have isn't useful. Isn't something.
Can you give me an example? I'm not sure I'm following you.
2 prophets lying dead in the streets.
Okay, so we're back to the end of the world.
Okay. What other prophecies are you talking about?
Do you want to hear some examples?
I do.
Or do you want to keep talking about the end of the world?
I don't know, man.
All right, when I was in Utah in November, it was we were driving into Provo Orem area. We're getting off at the University Parkway exit. I forget why we were there. If we were going to go, if that was the day we went to do our BYU tour, or if it's when we were touring the Orem Temple open house. But anyway, we were getting off at that exit, and we had heard as part of our drive that day, we'd heard the funeral for Elder Ballard, and I can't remember if I don't think this was part of the funeral. It was. I don't remember exactly, but there was an interview or a talk or something given by Elder Holland, and this was when he, maybe his first public appearance after his illness, and I did not recognize his voice. It's a little hard to figure out what was going on because I wasn't sure who was talking, and I missed the introduction. I don't remember exactly, but the point is, President Nelson told Jeffrey R. Holland, you can't die now. You have to sit in this seat someday. Feels a lot like a prophecy.
Okay.
President Nelson said Jeffrey R. Holland is going to be the prophet of the church. And so Jeffrey R. Holland could not die. So he didn't die.
Okay.
Now, the only way to feel that I could, I suppose, help that happen is if I go out and assassinate President Nelson, which I want to be clear, I have no plan to do. None. Not even an ounce of a plan. But like, I don't see how I can help that prophecy be fulfilled. Right? What could I do? Like that, there's nothing I can do to help that prophecy. But it feels the way it was phrased. I mean, it hasn't been declared a prophecy. We haven't voted on it. It's not canonized or anything. But the way it was presented, it really felt like President Nelson had prophesied Jeffrey R. Holland would be the prophet someday.
Could also have just been in jest.
Sure. I don't have so that's an entire possibility. Here's another one.
Okay.
I think I've shared this one on the show before, but in the 1960s, Hugh B. Brown did a tour of Japan. He was a member of the First Presidency at the time. His tour guide was Gordon B. Hinckley, who would later go on to be president of the church in the 90s. He had been the apostle to Asia for a while and was familiar with the nations and knew all the leaders, and he took Hugh B. Brown through Japan. And one of the things they did was they had a huge meeting in a large space so as many Japanese saints as possible could fit in the room. And Hugh B. Brown prophesied that in the lifetimes of some of the people in the room, there would be a Japanese apostle. Mm-hmm. And that night, Hugh B. Brown and Gordon B. Hinckley were talking, and Hugh B. Brown told Gordon B. Hinckley, like, you are the apostle to these people until one of their own is called. Like he explained, like, how it was a prophecy, like he felt it. It was the Spirit who moved him to make it. This prophecy was made. Gordon B. Hinckley is the apostle to the Japanese people until one of their own is called. So apparently, I mean, I don't want to, obviously choosing apostles is an inspired process, but apparently Gordon B. Hinckley didn't feel pressure to be the person to call that apostle. Mm-hmm. You might think he would have, right? Like if it was purely a rational decision, to be like, well, this is a prophecy, it needs to be fulfilled. I'm in a position to fulfill this prophecy before I die. I should replace, I forget who died during his presidency, but I should replace this person with a Japanese saint who can be an apostle. That didn't happen. And we still have not had a Japanese apostle. If you're President Nelson, or in a few years from now, President Holland, do you feel an obligation to make sure this prophecy is fulfilled? That prophecy is 60 years old now. The babes in arms are retired. What is your responsibility to prophecy? Do you have a responsibility to make it happen?
I have a couple other examples.
Yeah.
When I was on my mission in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro.
Yes.
There was a prophecy that was bandied about. Bandied?
With a D.
It was at least talked about during lots of trainings. Mm-hmm. And it was, keep working, keep baptizing, keep teaching, and someday you'll have a temple.
Oh, okay, good.
Where'd you think I was going?
I was afraid you were going to say that someday you'll have a beautiful wife. Oh. I did not want to hear that.
No, that is not what
in fact,
they said.
Aren't there 2 temples in Rio now?
I don't know about that, but I have
anyway.
I have the Brazil Rio de Janeiro temple open.
Okay.
Like the webpage open right now, and it looks beautiful. And so, I mean, this is something that, in fact, it's on the same street that my mission president used to live on. So at the time, though, it really felt like that we were working to fulfill a prophecy.
Yeah.
Like if we could get, enough good work done on our mission that we could get a temple in Rio, because the nearest temple was Sao Paulo. It was,
Yeah. So did you cheer when it was announced?
I did.
How did it feel?
It was announced in 2013. I remember being excited about it. I don't know that I tracked it very carefully. Like I wasn't sure right now as I was looking up if it had actually happened. But my mission was a long time ago, so these things don't stick in your head as high priorities as they were.
Note to audience: Aaron is old.
I am. I even think I revealed my age earlier.
You mentioned something about, is it worth making it to 50? I'd like to point out Aaron's not that old.
I'm not that old.
He's only old compared to a missionary. So here's a question for you.
But there's another.
Oh, go ahead. Okay. Wait, let me comment on this one first before you go to the second one.
Yeah.
So you've felt the satisfaction of being at the end of a prophecy.
Yeah.
Now, what if that was still 150 years off? Would you feel differently? Can you live as if the temple is built now?
Well, that was what it was so great of a prophecy, is that It didn't have to be a prophecy because it's so far in the. Someday in the future. Brazil's like a really huge city. It's like in the top X% of all cities.
Rio
in Rio is.
Yeah.
And it was secondhand information by then. We treated it as a prophecy, but I wasn't there when the guy said it. Maybe it wasn't phrased like that. Maybe it was phrased as work really hard and someday you might get a temple here. Right. As opposed to someday you will get a temple here. Right?
Nobody said that on my mission, but there's a temple in Busan now, or they're going to be.
There you go. Yeah, that's why I questioned your statement about Jeffrey R. Holland, because like I said, it could easily have been
right.
You gotta make it.
I can
you
see
gotta
that
take
being
over.
a way apostles josh with themselves. I don't want to seem on the record of declaring this has to be a prophecy, but I do think it's an interesting problem, and because some things will end. Like you and I are likely to see the end of both President Nelson and President Holland.
This is a weird conversation.
Sure.
Because it presupposes the existence of the reality of prophecy.
Yeah, I'm doing that.
Okay, so keep going.
Okay. So we may be a long ways from the second coming, and my feeling is we are in the middle of this, but we're not in the middle of all things. Someday you'll be near the end of your life, and I suspect you will live long enough that it won't be a great surprise. When you're 85, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you're near the end. Is it 2 weeks from now? Is it 10 years from now? Is it 15 years? Like, don't know, but it's the final lap.
Mm-hmm.
So is there any difference in the way we consider these things? So going back to, there's an article in...
Oh, do you want to hear the other?
Oh, yeah, let's hear your other one. And then we'll talk about the February 22 Liahona.
Well, the other prophecy is Zion in Missouri.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
It's interesting. I just did the math on this yesterday, and by which I meant I went through the Doctrine and Covenants, looked at every instance of the phrase Land of Zion.
Yeah.
Land of Zion in the Doctrine and Covenants only ever refers to Missouri. It never refers to anything else, ever.
Yeah. Right? And I just think, we're not going to go into that topic right now, but there is a prophecy.
Yeah, there is. So in this episode, in this issue of Liahona, there's an article called Living as Though God's Promises Have Been Fulfilled, which should sound familiar.
That's great.
Because it comes from Jarom 1:11. How do you feel about people putting chapter numbers on books that only have one chapter?
Whoa, more hot takes.
It's such a waste of ink.
It is.
I suppose it prevents confusion, but I kind of hate it. I don't get worked up about it or anything, but anyway, but this is specifically about patriarchal blessings. So if we were to bust out our patriarchal blessings, we would probably find some things that seem to have been fulfilled and some things that do not seem to have been fulfilled. There's a good chance we'll find some things that seem like we may see fulfilled in this life and things that we may not see fulfilled in this life. There may also be some things where if they are not fulfilled in this life, a classic example is you'll have children to someone who never gets married or has children. Mm-hmm. Things that really seem like they have to do with this mortality and they aren't happening. But, we have an eternal perspective on families, so maybe we can get around that one. But what if you're, I don't know, what if your patriarchal blessing, Aaron, said that you will surely possess great wealth in this life and have the funds to support thousands in their poverty? If it said something like that, and you went on to become a scientist, do you feel like you've betrayed the prophecy? Do you feel like do you have an obligation to change to go into high finance as a quant?
Without talking about the details of my patriarchal blessing.
Yeah, I'm trying to avoid that. I'm trying to make things up.
We haven't really talked about that particular aspect of them. I love mine. Mm-hmm. And in the church, we don't typically talk about the contents of it except for those that are immediate family members, right? Mm-hmm. But mine was definitely a source of comfort. I was, I like any kid, I had anxiety about the future, and mine, said this and that and the other thing about the future, and I was like, okay, maybe now, maybe things will be okay, in the future. And there was nothing weird or unusual about being nervous about what the future holds. That's just what everybody feels.
Yeah.
But having a source of prophecy, of things will be okay, that made a big difference in my life.
Yeah, there's a story my dad
without me feeling like I needed to. Some things made me feel like I needed to do specific things, maybe a little bit differently than maybe I would have if I hadn't. But it didn't say ride a horse to Nebraska.
No. There's a story my dad likes to tell. I don't know if he's still telling it, but I've heard it at least a half dozen times, usually in like a Sunday school or an elder's quorum or something. And the story goes like, there's a young man of my acquaintance who his patriarchal blessing said he would be a bishop. That is probably not something that young man can make happen. If it doesn't happen, is that a sign of his failure, or is it a sign that he's not trying hard enough? Does he have an obligation to tell his stake president, God said I'd be a bishop, so I'm not saying you have to call me as bishop, but somebody needs to. Could you just leave that on my file? Is it something that's just ignored? Is that something that can be fulfilled in the eternities? That feels like a pretty here and now kind of prophecy.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, this was your father.
My father tells this story. I couldn't tell you who the story's about.
I need some primary sources on patriarchal blessings. All right. And I was reading the Wikipedia article, and I was on patriarchal blessings, and I was reading the church websites on them, and they have them all on file.
You can get all your direct ancestors' patriarchal blessings sent to you as long as they're dead.
As long as they're...
And they have one, of course.
Okay. But only your direct ancestors.
Only your direct ancestors.
They have so many.
Yeah, I have some friends in the church history department, and I published a story, I guess it was last year, in which a patriarchal blessing plays an important role. Kind of for a similar issue as this bishop thing I told you about.
In Irreantum.
No, this was published in a collection called The Gate and the Path from Signature Book.
Okay.
And I sent it to a friend of mine because I included the text of the fictional patriarchal blessing in the story. And I felt a little bad because I gave the patriarch, who's from rural Utah, bad, fake King James-ish grammar. And I said, am I pushing this too far? Is this okay? And he said, look, I've read, I don't remember how many he said, let's say dozens of patriarchal blessings from this time period, and you were not pushing it far enough. They butcher their fake Shakespearean wordage in the patriarchal blessings. You can push it a lot farther. So I did push it further and made the faux old grammar worse for the patriarchal blessing. That's not the point, obviously. This is not an episode about grammar. But the point is that, I agree. There are lots of them, and church historians have them. So
it'd be so interesting to do.
It'd be a really interesting study.
To do a study on them,
I'm
right?
not sure the church would approve that study.
Oh, they would never let it happen.
But I would be very interested too.
How many? I want to get in there lexicographically, right?
Yeah.
And do stuff find the specific, the most specific prophecies. You will be a bishop, you will be a high priest, I don't even know what they are. Right? I want to do an analysis of how many people are told they're in which tribes of Israel. Because we haven't mentioned that yet. If you get a patriarchal blessing, you're told which tribe of Israel that you are either part of or adopted into. Right?
Which, as we've discussed in previous episodes, are the same thing.
Yes. And I would love to do an analysis of, how many of the times where there was a specific prophecy can we show that it actually happened or didn't happen in their lives?
Was you'll be there for the millennium? What year did that peak? Or has it peaked yet?
Yeah. I want to, and exactly. And I want to put p-values on these things.
Yeah.
Right? And then I want to feed them into a neural network and train an AI to write patriarchal blessings.
And that's the end of your story.
Yeah.
So,
the middle.
So we've now talked about the two things I wanted to talk about today.
Prophecy.
One was prophecy and our relationship to it and our responsibility to it. And the other one is living in the middle. Because in a way, these things feel...
I want to answer the first question.
Go ahead.
The question, what is our responsibility to prophecy?
Yes.
I don't feel any responsibility to prophecy. There's a few things in my patriarchal blessing that said this will happen to you, if you do this. It was all good stuff, right? I felt a responsibility to be a good person to try and make some of those nice things happen.
Yeah.
Right? And these are general things, but like I said, patriarchal blessings are not specific. It didn't say I was going to be a scientist, right?
Sure. Generally, they're not.
And generally they're not. But in terms of I don't feel any responsibility to prophecies,
So is that also your answer to the question of what's the unique responsibility to living in the middle?
I feel a lot of responsibility to that. Yeah, I really appreciate the way you're framing this of living in the middle, because it does feel so contrasty to stuff that I heard when I was younger.
Yeah, I mean, it would be so exciting to be there with Joseph Smith, right? When there's new prophecy every week, and you're, oh my gosh, 3 degrees of glory, amazing.
Yeah, I mean, the name of our church is Latter-day Saints.
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Not Last Day.
Not Last Day.
Latter Day. They changed the name of the church in the Korean because it was a little too Last Day-y.
Oh, did they really?
I discovered that a couple years ago that I didn't know the name of the church.
That's great. Okay, go on. You covered the two things you wanted to
Right, so those are the two things. And so I'm interested in the sort of the contrast between the two, because as a people who believe in ongoing revelation, who believe in an ongoing restoration, who believe in an open heaven and an open canon.
We believe in prophecy.
Right, all these things sound more like an ongoing beginning than a middle.
Yeah.
But just looking at the math of like when did canonized scripture come out and exciting new developments. I mean, exciting is not a definable word. It was amazing. To me, it was really fascinating how much when the missionary age was changed and elders were allowed to leave at 18 instead of 19 and sisters were allowed to leave at 19 instead of 21, how that like was talked about as an astonishing world-changing bit of prophecy. And it has actually made a really big difference, and it was a really good change. I think that's provable. But on the other hand, it also was just sort of a bureaucratic decision. And I'm not saying it wasn't inspired, but compared to learning that there are 3 degrees of glory, it does feel a lower hill, right, to summit. And so I feel like a lot of ways of measuring things, we are in the middle. So how do we, and as you say, we're the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We've heard a lot of millennial rhetoric in our life. And so the ends and the beginnings are really attractive. And I'm not saying there's no truth to us living in an ongoing beginning. I'm not saying there's no truth to us being near the end. But I think the bigger truth is we live in the middle. So how do we accept that as part of our identity and turn it into a good thing?
Well, I think that we do it the same way that our prophets are doing it, right?
Go on.
Which is de-emphasizing the end. And instead giving us talks about, the atonement, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, giving talks about service, about prayer, about the temple, about missionary work. I mean, I feel like if you read the lexicon of General Conference talks over the last 10 years, mm-hmm. right, that the amount of deep doctrine, right, quote unquote, like going off into the mysteries and into the deep trivia that you'll mm-hmm. hear, is just not there, right? Instead, it's the good doctrine, right? The good word.
What do you mean? Oh, I see. The gospel.
It's the gospel.
Be kind to your neighbors,
right?
Stuff.
It's the stuff that is like the problem with the phrase "the deep doctrine," right? Is that it implies that faith, repentance, baptism, and the gift of the Holy Ghost is a shallow mm-hmm. thing.
Yeah,
but it ain't.
Right.
And you can do 10 years of General Conference talks and still feel like you're learning about it, right?
Yes.
And so while shows like ours are fun to go into the deep doctrine, right? There's a reason why we don't do this in Sunday school, right? Except for women and priests a couple Sundays.
But really the purpose of that was to be kind to our neighbor, right? Yeah. And to understand our neighbor and how our neighbor feels and how to love our neighbor and how to succor our neighbor. Yeah. So I don't think it's distinct. Yeah. And the sisters of now, right?
Mm-hmm. So that's my answer to the question. How do we live more in the middle? Is we de-emphasize the end. Yeah. And we do what the seminary manual does. So this is something that I've really noticed as I've been teaching seminary over the last year and a half. Uh-huh. Is that you'll get to something like a battle chapter in the Book of Mormon. Mm-hmm. And instead of focusing on the battle, it focuses on the prayer that went before the battle. Uh-huh. Right?
Yeah.
You focus on the stuff that matters to the spiritual day-to-day lives of people who can only attend church once a week for 2 hours, or who are doing seminary, but it's only a little bit for 4 years and then it's over.
Sure.
Right? And you got to do it the rest of your life. Right? I could spend a ton of time talking about how cool it is that it describes the different armors and scimitars and things like that.
Yeah.
Right? But I'm not gonna.
Why is scimitar spelled that way?
Is it
so interesting?
Is it? Wait, what?
Yeah,
huh?
The way it's spelled in the Book of Mormon is a spelling unique to the Book of Mormon.
Oh my, the stars and diamonds. That's one of the coolest things I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Okay, but I can't do that, right? Because I've got to tell the kids how to pray.
Yeah.
Right? And just because they're in high school doesn't mean that they've heard it in the way that's going to stick.
Yeah.
Make them want to go and get on their knees and actually say a prayer, right?
Yeah.
Maybe this is the lesson that helps. Maybe it's not, right? But I've got to stick to these doctrines.
Yeah.
And when I taught Revelation, right? Mm-hmm. I did do fun history stuff.
That's all it's for.
But I made sure to bring in, lessons.
Yeah. So this is back to Sharon Harris's book about Enos, Jarom, Omni. And she says, in the metaphoric Great Plains of the pioneers' trek west, it can seem that all there is to do is walk and walk and walk and walk. Because most of that time was the middle, right? You leave winter quarters, you get to Utah. Those are 1 day each. The rest of the time, you're just walking. Mm-hmm. I think that's kind of a beautiful metaphor for what we're talking about. We're all pioneers.
That's great.
Anyway, trivia.
Okay, yeah, I have some fun trivia.
Okay.
And then you want to...
And then I have something
to wrap us up. Okay.
I think so.
Patriarchal blessing trivia.
Okay.
Okay. Who was the first patriarch?
Joseph Smith Sr.
Whose name is?
Joseph Smith Sr.
Oh, right. That's true. and who did he... Or I have the different... I was reading a little bit farther ahead.
Oh, okay.
Who was the second patriarch?
I think it was Hiram.
You're right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Hiram Smith. That's what I was... Blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
Okay, good. How much was a patriarchal blessing?
Oh, you had to pay for it? Oh, I didn't know that. I feel like I have heard that before. I don't know. I'll say 2 bits.
That's good. Okay, so let me read you this little quote. It's really fun. All right. According to historian D. Michael Quinn, who we've talked about before, patriarchs were paid in the early days of the LDS Church. The practice of paying patriarchs diminished in the 20th century and ended in 1943. Both the presiding patriarch and local stake patriarchs charged a fee. In the 1840s, it was $1 per patriarchal blessing in Nauvoo.
Significant.
By the end of the 19th century, it had increased to $2 per patriarchal blessing. Joseph Smith Sr. gave patriarchal blessings without payment of a fee, but would not record them.
Oh.
I don't know if they're implying that he would only write them down if they paid the $2.
That's what it sounds like. That's interesting.
Quote-unquote Uncle John Smith, I don't know what that's referring to, commented that he lived very poor since we left Kirtland, Ohio, from January 1838 to January 1844. Then his nephew, Joseph Smith, that's what the uncle was for, ordained him a patriarch, through which office I obtained a comfortable living. Well, a little bit more.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Patriarchal blessing fees ended in 1902, although patriarchs were able to accept unsolicited donations, and not until 1943 did church authorities prohibit patriarchs from accepting gratuities for giving blessings.
I have read stories in early Utah of how patriarchs were almost itinerant because they had to travel so far, and when you visited a family, everyone in the family got their blessing that day because you didn't know when you'd see the patriarch again. I also know that Joseph Smith was worried about his dad, who was not the most successful person at putting together a living. So,
interesting.
So I had read that he had given him the calling of patriarch to help him just get by, but I didn't understand it was so literal.
Yeah, I don't know about that. That's 2 interesting lines of investigation. One more trivia question. You ready?
Okay.
What do they call patriarchs in the community of Christ?
Ooh, I'm going to say evangelists.
You're correct.
Hey!
Why do they call them that?
I don't know, but I do know that when in the Articles of Faith, maybe this is why we talk about the primitive church. Or no, it's not the primitive church. Or is it the primitive church? Well, anyway, the one that talks about different offices or callings of the church, and evangelists are mentioned. In our church, we generally understand that to mean patriarchs.
But why? Why did they change the name?
Probably to seem less Mormon, would be my guess.
Nope.
No? Okay, good. I'm glad that's not the reason. I don't know. To make themselves seem more New Testament?
Nope.
Because they were sued by Joseph Smith's nephew or something who was the patriarch in Utah?
It's because it's a gendered word, patriarch.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. That's COC.
And women can be patriarchs.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They can be evangelists.
Okay. Yeah.
There's also differences as to what they're used for. You can have more of them. It's one of the 8 sacraments of the church, is what it's called, along with baptism, confirmation, communion, ordination, blessing of children, laying on of hands. So there's a fun paragraph on it here in the patriarchal blessing section, which we'll link to.
Yeah, I will have to follow that link.
Okay, take us home.
Okay. So back to Sharon Harris. She says, I'm going to skip a bit, so it's going to seem like we're starting in the middle of an idea. We are. The difference is in how they see. Those with strength can see themselves as not in the middle, but see or look forward unto the Messiah and believe in him to come as though he already was. Strength in the middle comes from the Messiah. He turns the slog of the middle into the freedom of the Messianic. In the Messianic, the grind of the messy middle becomes as not a grind. I'm trying to emphasize as not because that's a quotation, right? She's using this as not to get us out of the middle. In our relationship with the Messiah, like Jarom, we let go of that which simply isn't needed. We find the peace to leave out some things, to let them become invisible. Perhaps we do not need so desperately to see our progress, to confirm our expectations of prophecy, especially where those expectations may lead us to expect the worst in others. We can, in general, refrain. Jarom tells what the people did not do. They profaned not, neither did they blaspheme. Holding back certain responses or actions is usually thankless, a generally unrecognized form of fidelity and kindness and discipleship. But Jarom's omissions improve the inheritance of the covenant. When we see the Messiah as though he already was, he sees us too. We see clearly in the peace of the Messianic. So living in the middle is the least exciting part of the trilogy. Mm-hmm. It's often the part where things feel like they're going wrong and there's no end in sight. But if we live as if Jesus has already come, if we live as if, then we can have that where you are in time doesn't matter so much. We read that to God all time is now, and to us it can be the same. All time can be messianic. All time can be a connection with our Savior. It doesn't matter if it's the beginning, the middle, or the end.
That's great. Thanks for bringing up this topic.
Sure.
These are themes that we've covered. We've never covered it like this before, but we've talked. But this theme of changes in the presentation of the gospel and changes in how we think about the past, present, and future, and about end times and prophecy, and it's great.
We've been doing this long enough that people can tell what our preoccupations are.
All right, we're a proud member of the Dialogue Podcasting Network.
Yes, look for the first episode of the Women in Priesthood series to appear on their feed soon.
Yeah, and we'd like to thank Daniel Foster-Smith for our music.
He's a nice guy.
And with that, and we've had lots of discussion on Discord.
Yeah, there was an explosion of discussion today. I foolishly clicked on it when I was in the middle of a meeting and couldn't give it my full attention, but usually it's just a couple things, but there's a little explosion today. Please join us.
Yeah. Lots of stuff about polygamy.
Yeah.
It comes up again.
Yeah, everybody loves polygamy. That is an inaccurate representation of the discussion.
Correct. Yeah, thanks to our Discordians. And thanks, Eric.
Yeah, see you later, Aaron.
Bye.
Bye.